Exiting with dignity isn't about proving a point. It's about knowing your worth and acting from it. When you walk away calmly, without chaos or explanation, you leave the ego with nothing to push against. And that quiet strength is what makes the loss impossible to undo. Dignity has a quiet authority that ego can't compete with. When you choose to exit without begging, blaming, or explaining, you remove the foundation on which the ego feels powerful. Control for the ego often comes from emotional access. As long as it can provoke a reaction, extract reassurance, or pull you into justification, it feels influential. The moment you leave with dignity, that influence disappears. Not dramatically, not loudly, but completely. Many people believe closure requires explanation. In reality, excessive explanation often feeds the ego. It provides material to debate, reinterpret, or dismiss. When you stop explaining, you deny the ego its favorite tools. There's nothing to twist, nothing to argue with, nothing to minimize. Your calm exit communicates something far stronger than words ever could. Your self-respect is no longer negotiable. Begging and blaming both keep you emotionally entangled. Begging suggests dependence, reinforcing the ego's sense of superiority. Blaming invites defense, keeping the dynamic alive through conflict. Dignity does neither. It disengages cleanly. You're not asking to be chosen, and you're not trying to make someone feel guilty. You're simply choosing yourself. That decision removes the ego's illusion that it holds power over your emotional state. What makes this so destabilizing for the ego is that it can no longer position itself at the center of the story. When you plead or accuse, the ego remains relevant. It can feel attacked or needed. But when you exit quietly and respectfully, the ego becomes incidental. You don't frame your life around its behavior. You don't seek validation or accountability from it. You just leave. And that relegation is deeply uncomfortable for anyone who believed they were essential. From your side, exiting with dignity requires restraint and clarity. It means resisting the urge to explain yourself into understanding or to express pain in hopes of being seen. It means trusting that your actions speak clearly enough. This isn't emotional suppression, it's emotional maturity. You acknowledge your feelings privately while refusing to hand them over for negotiation. That internal boundary is where your strength lives. The ego often mistakes access for entitlement. If you've been open, forgiving, or accommodating, it may assume that access is permanent. Dignity disrupts that assumption. By leaving calmly, you demonstrate that access is conditional on mutual respect. Once that respect is missing, access is revoked without announcement or debate. This teaches a powerful lesson. Your presence was a privilege, not a guarantee. Another reason dignity dismantles control is that it creates uncertainty without chaos. The ego can manage chaos. It thrives in it. Arguments, tears, and dramatic exits are familiar territory. Dignity is unfamiliar. It offers no emotional cues to react to. The ego doesn't know whether to chase, defend, or dismiss because there's no provocation. This ambiguity lingers, forcing reflection long after the interaction ends. Importantly, a dignified exit doesn't seek revenge. It doesn't aim to hurt or teach a lesson. Its power comes from alignment, not intention. You leave because staying would compromise your values, not because you want a reaction. That purity of motive is what makes the exit irreversible. The ego can rationalize anger, but it struggles to dismiss self-respect. Over time, the memory of your dignified departure becomes more impactful than any argument ever could. There's no scene to replay or words to invalidate, just the undeniable fact that you walked away intact. And that is why dignity removes the ego's illusion of control. It proves, without confrontation, that your life is governed by your standards, not by its expectations. Anger feels powerful in the moment, but it often works in the ego's favor. When you leave in anger, Raised voices or sharp words give the ego something to push against. It can dismiss your feelings as emotional, irrational, or temporary. Anger creates noise, and within that noise, the ego finds room to defend itself, justify its behavior, or even feel validated by the intensity of your reaction. Silence paired with respect does the opposite. It removes the battlefield entirely. When you respond with dignity instead of anger, the ego loses its familiar reference point. There is no outburst to blame, no emotional spike to label as overreaction. Your calm becomes unsettling because it doesn't fit the script. The ego expects conflict. It expects to argue, to win, or at least to feel important enough to provoke emotion. When you leave quietly with composure intact, it forces the ego to confront something far more uncomfortable than anger, indifference grounded in self-respect. Silence after respect carries weight because it cannot be dismissed as impulsive. Anger is often interpreted as temporary, a moment that might pass once emotions cool. Dignified silence feels deliberate. It suggests thought, clarity, and finality. The ego senses that this isn't a reaction but a decision, and decisions, unlike emotions, are harder to reverse or manipulate. Respectful silence also removes the ego's ability to rewrite the narrative. In heated exchanges, words can be twisted, intentions questioned, and responsibility deflected. When you leave without attacking or accusing, there's nothing to reinterpret. The ego is left alone with its own actions and the consequence they produced, your absence. That absence becomes the message, and it is far clearer than any argument could be. Another reason silence hits harder than anger is that it disrupts validation. Anger still signals emotional investment. It tells the ego that it matters enough to provoke a response. Silence does not offer that reassurance. It communicates that the connection no longer holds the same emotional weight for you. That shift is deeply unsettling because it removes the ego's sense of significance. From your perspective, choosing respect over anger protects your integrity. You don't have to relive the moment wondering if you went too far or said something you regret. You leave knowing you honored your values and maintained self-control. That inner peace reinforces the finality of your decision. You're not tempted to return to explain or repair damage because no damage was created on your side. Silence also prevents emotional hooks. Anger often leaves threads that pull you back. Unfinished arguments, unresolved tension, or lingering guilt. Respectful silence cuts those threads cleanly. There's nothing left to resolve because you didn't escalate. You simply withdrew. That clean break allows you to move forward without emotional residue, while the ego remains stuck replaying what it didn't get, a reaction. The ego struggles with this because it cannot externalize blame. Anger gives it a target, silence removes it. Without conflict, the ego must sit with unanswered questions. Why did you leave so calmly? Why didn't you fight? Why didn't you try to convince or persuade? Those questions linger precisely because there are no answers offered. In the end, silence after respect doesn't just hurt more, it lasts longer. Anger fades, arguments blur, words lose their edge. But the memory of someone leaving calmly, without bitterness, without noise, without explanation, stays. It quietly rewrites how the ego understands the loss, not as a fight it survived, but as a connection it lost without the chance to recover. A graceful exit has a unique power because it removes the buffer that often protects the ego from accountability. When you leave loudly or emotionally, attention shifts to the conflict itself, the tone, the argument, the words exchanged. The ego can hide behind those distractions, but when you create distance calmly, without accusation or dramatics, there is nothing to distract from the core issue. Your absence becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, the ego is forced to confront its own behavior. Self-reflection is uncomfortable for the ego because it threatens the identity it tries to maintain. The ego prefers external explanations, misunderstandings, bad timing, emotional reactions. Graceful distance eliminates those excuses. You didn't storm off, you didn't lash out, you didn't demand change, you simply stepped back. That quiet withdrawal makes one question why someone would leave so calmly unless there was a real reason. This kind of distance shifts the emotional labor back where it belongs. Often people absorb discomfort to keep the peace, smooth over issues, or maintain connection. When you exit gracefully, you stop carrying that weight. You no longer manage someone else's emotions, reactions, or defensiveness. Instead, the person you leave behind must sit with the emotional space you once filled. In that space, reflection naturally begins. The ego struggles here because it loses its audience. Without you present to react, reassure, or engage, there is no external validation to lean on. The silence becomes louder than words. It asks questions the ego would rather avoid. Was I careless? Did I assume too much? Did I take this person for granted? These questions may not be consciously articulated, but they surface internally as discomfort, restlessness, or regret. Graceful distance also removes the opportunity for immediate repair or justification. In many dynamics, the ego relies on quick fixes, apologies without change, charm without accountability, promises without follow-through. Your calm departure blocks that pathway. There is no chance to smooth things over or regain comfort through surface-level gestures. The ego must confront the reality that something fundamental has shifted, and that shift came from its own actions, not from your reaction. From your side, this distance is an act of emotional maturity. You are choosing not to escalate or educate. You trust that your boundaries do not require explanation to be valid. That trust strengthens your sense of self-respect. You are no longer seeking understanding or validation from someone who has already shown you their limits. Instead, you honor your experience by stepping away. The absence created by graceful distance lingers because it is unresolved. Conflict often feels resolved once emotions burn out, even if nothing truly changes. Calm withdrawal leaves no emotional release. There is no argument to conclude, no dramatic ending to signal closure. The situation remains open-ended, and that open-endedness invites reflection. The ego keeps returning to the moment, trying to understand what went wrong because there was no explosion to blame. Importantly, this reflection is not something you force. You do not lecture, accuse, or demand insight. You simply create the conditions where insight becomes unavoidable. By leaving without bitterness, you demonstrate that the issue was not emotional volatility, but a misalignment that could no longer be ignored. That realization cuts deeper than any accusation. Over time, the memory of your graceful exit becomes a point of reference. The ego recalls not a fight, but a loss that happened quietly. That quietness is what makes it echo. It removes the comfort of self-deception and replaces it with a lingering awareness. Someone valued themselves enough to walk away without needing to be loud. And that awareness, whether acknowledged or not, is what forces genuine self-reflection. Composure has a way of reshaping power without ever announcing itself. When you exit calmly and with self-respect, you quietly rewrite the story of who held control in the dynamic. Power is often mistaken for dominance. The person who speaks louder, demands more, or seems less affected. But true power is revealed in restraint. When you remain centered and composed while walking away, you demonstrate that your sense of worth is internal, not dependent on validation, reaction, or outcome. In many relationships or connections, the unspoken power imbalance comes from emotional dependency. The one who reacts more, explains more, or stays longer than they should often feels they have less leverage. When you maintain composure, you break that pattern. You are no longer signaling need, desperation, or fear of loss. Instead, you signal choice. You are choosing yourself not in opposition to someone else, but in alignment with your own standards. That choice is what shifts the dynamic. The ego feels this shift immediately because it loses its assumed position. It may have believed that you would argue, plead, or seek reassurance. Those responses would have confirmed its importance. Composure denies that confirmation. Your calm exit suggests that your stability does not hinge on the connection. That realization is deeply unsettling because it reframes the entire narrative. You didn't lose something essential. You released something misaligned. This rewrite of the power dynamic happens silently. There is no declaration of independence, no grand statement. The power moves because of what you don't do. You don't chase, you don't convince, you don't react. That absence of reaction speaks of inner security. It communicates that your sense of self remains intact regardless of the outcome. The ego, which often relies on emotional reactions to feel relevant, suddenly finds itself peripheral. From your perspective, composure preserves dignity and clarity. You walk away without emotional residue, without regret over words spoken in heat. That clarity reinforces your decision internally. You are less likely to second-guess or return seeking validation because you didn't compromise yourself in the exit. Your memory of the moment is clean. You remember yourself as calm, grounded, and self-directed. That memory strengthens your confidence moving forward. The power dynamic also shifts in how the situation is remembered. Dramatic exits are easy to dismiss. They can be labeled as emotional or impulsive. Composed exits resist dismissal. They suggest deliberation and resolve. The ego may replay the moment, searching for signs of weakness or uncertainty and find none. That absence becomes the defining feature. The story transforms from they overreacted to they chose to leave. Composure also limits the ego's ability to regain influence later. Emotional exits often leave doors ajar. Unresolved feelings, lingering attachments, unfinished conversations. Calm exits close those doors naturally. There is no emotional hook left to pull you back. You didn't create chaos that needs cleaning up. You simply stepped away. That finality is what makes the power shift enduring rather than temporary. Importantly, this composure is not emotional suppression. It is emotional regulation. You feel what you feel, but you do not outsource your emotions for someone else to manage or respond to. You honor them privately and act deliberately. That distinction is crucial. It shows maturity, not detachment, strength, not coldness. Your composure becomes the most powerful statement you make. Without a single argument or explanation, you redefine the dynamic. You demonstrate that power does not belong to the one who provokes reaction, but to the one who can walk away intact. And in that quiet recalibration, the ego realizes it no longer occupies the center. You do. A dignified exit has permanence because it leaves no emotional loopholes behind. Drama keeps doors open. Arguments invite follow-ups. Emotional goodbyes create unfinished business. But when you leave calmly, without scenes or ultimatums, you close the cycle in a way that cannot be easily reopened. There's no confusion about where you stand, yet there's also no hostility that invites re-engagement. The connection doesn't end in chaos, it ends in clarity. And clarity is what makes an ending final. Emotional cycles tend to repeat because they feed on reaction. When something ends dramatically, it often restarts quietly. Apologies come in, nostalgia creeps back, old patterns resurface. Drama creates momentum. A dignified exit stops momentum entirely. There's no emotional surge to ride back into familiarity. The energy drops, settles, and stays settled. That's why the cycle doesn't restart. There's nothing left to spin. Ego, this is especially destabilizing. It relies on emotional access to reopen doors. If there was a fight, it can apologize. If there was anger, it can soothe. If there were tears, it can promise change. A calm exit removes those entry points. There's no emotional debt to repay, no damage to repair, no crisis to fix. The ego is left without a role, and without a role, it loses relevance. From your side, a dignified exit protects you from self-betrayal. When you leave without drama, you don't create a version of yourself you later have to reconcile with. You don't wonder if you were too harsh or too soft. You don't replay conversations wishing you'd said less or more. You leave knowing you honored your values. That inner alignment is what prevents you from reopening the door later out of guilt, curiosity, or unresolved emotion. Other reason the cycle ends permanently is that dignity removes emotional bargaining. Drama often masks hope that the other person will finally understand, change, or fight to keep you. A calm exit carries no such expectation. It signals acceptance of reality rather than resistance to it. You're not leaving to be chased. You're leaving because you're done negotiating your worth. That acceptance shuts down the push and pull dynamic completely. The absence of drama also changes how the ending lives in memory. Loud endings fade because they blur into emotion. Calm endings stay sharp because they are simple. The ego remembers not what you said, but what you did. You left peacefully and didn't come back. That consistency reinforces finality. There's no mixed signal to reinterpret, no emotional trail to follow, just a clear line drawn and respected. This kind of ending also reconditions your future boundaries. Once you experience how powerful and peaceful a dignified exit feels, you're less willing to tolerate situations that require constant emotional negotiation. You learn that you don't need closure conversations or dramatic resolutions to move on. Your nervous system associates leaving with calm rather than chaos. That lesson carries forward, strengthening your self-trust in future connections. On the other side, the lack of drama becomes the closure it didn't ask for. There's no opportunity to reframe the story as mutual chaos or shared fault. The ending stands as a quiet consequence. And because there's no emotional residue to attach to, the connection cannot be revived without confronting the reality that it ended because it no longer met your standards. That is why a dignified exit ends the cycle permanently. It doesn't explode the bridge, it simply stops crossing it. And when no one walks back, the path grows quiet, unused, and eventually irrelevant. Peace is the ultimate consequence the ego cannot control. When you choose tranquility over reaction, calm over chaos, and self-respect over validation, the impact resonates far deeper than any argument ever could. The ego thrives on disturbance, on being the center of conflict, on provoking responses to feel relevant. When you leave or disengage with peace intact, it suddenly finds itself irrelevant, exposed, and unable to manipulate the situation to its advantage. Peace removes the fuel that feeds the ego, and in that absence, its control crumbles. The ego is accustomed to drama because drama provides direction. Arguments, emotional outbursts, and conflict give it purpose and visibility. They allow it to measure importance and assert dominance. But when you exit or withdraw peacefully, none of that is available. There is no spectacle, no confrontation, no opportunity to assert itself. Silence and composure replace the expected chaos, leaving the ego with nothing but its own reflection. And reflections are uncomfortable because they reveal truths it prefers to ignore. Choosing peace over reaction also communicates value without aggression. It demonstrates that your presence, your energy, and your attention are not commodities to be taken or earned through emotional coercion. You maintain control by refusing to participate in the ego's typical games. You signal that respect for yourself is non-negotiable and that the connection is only meaningful on terms that honor your boundaries. This subtle authority is far more disorienting than anger or accusation because it cannot be countered or dismissed. Perspective, peace is liberating. It protects you from emotional exhaustion and prevents unnecessary entanglement. There's no need to justify your choice, explain your absence, or defend your boundaries. You act deliberately, with clarity and confidence, and in doing so, you maintain inner alignment. That alignment strengthens your sense of self, reinforces your dignity, and prevents the ego from drawing you back into cycles of manipulation, guilt, or obligation. The ego reacts most strongly to what it cannot influence. When it can provoke anger, confusion, or drama, it maintains a foothold. When it cannot, it feels powerless. Peace removes all levers. It denies the ego entry into your emotional world. There is no chaos to manage, no words to debate, no emotional debt to collect. This absence of engagement leaves the ego unmoored, forcing a confrontation with reality it cannot control. You are no longer invested in its validation or influence. Other reason peace destabilizes the ego is that it is subtle yet undeniable. There is no spectacle to rationalize or dismiss. There is only the presence of calm in the face of what once demanded reaction. The ego cannot argue against serenity, cannot manipulate it, and cannot coerce it into reactivity. It simply exists as a witness to your unwavering composure. And in that witness, it realizes it no longer occupies the center. You do. Peace also prevents lingering confusion or doubt. When you leave with calm and clarity, there are no emotional hooks left behind. The ego cannot replay arguments, reinterpret intentions, or hold on to perceived slights as justification for control. The path is clear, boundaries are intact, and the consequence is complete, absence reinforced by dignity and tranquility. Over time, the impact of peace becomes more profound than any confrontation. Arguments fade, anger dissipates, but calm, composed absence leaves a lasting impression. The ego cannot rewrite the memory because there is no narrative to distort. It cannot recover because the lesson is embedded in action, not words. Your choice to prioritize peace over reaction demonstrates strength, independence, and self-respect in a way the ego can neither undermine nor reverse. Peace is the consequence the ego cannot undo. It exposes what was assumed, reveals what was taken for granted, and leaves the ego with nothing to control. Your serenity becomes both shield and statement, unassailable, permanent, and utterly transformative. Exiting with dignity and peace is not about revenge or proving a point. It's about honoring your worth and reclaiming your power. When you walk away calmly, without drama, anger, or explanation, you remove the ego's ability to manipulate, defend, or regain control. Silence, composure, and self-respect speak louder than any argument ever could. In that quiet authority, you restore balance, demonstrate true strength, and leave a lasting impact that cannot be undone. Choosing yourself with grace ensures that your presence is never taken for granted again, and your peace becomes the consequence the ego cannot recover from.